Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 10 Part 54 based on novel. So let's start. Majestic Yuan power erupted from within Suru's body as the longsword in her hand transformed into countless sharp sword glows, killing the dozen attacking Yuan Gate disciples around her. However, the Yuan power within her body was clearly unable to endure for long in the face of the flood-like attacks. That pretty face of hers was now filled with paleness. Even though waves of terrible fatigue spread from within her body, Suru still tightly clenched her teeth as she looked at the corpses that covered the ground. Both of her eyes were red while helplessness rose inside her heart. The attackers were currently still ordinary Yuan Gate disciples. The extremely frightening elders were simply watching their resistance in an indifferent manner. Once these elders attacked, it was likely that the defenses of Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace would collapse almost immediately. Currently, they were merely enjoying the frantic struggling of Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace just before it was destroyed. Junior Sister Suru, careful! An urgent shout suddenly rang out while Suru was feeling slightly dazed. She abruptly regained her focus. The pores on her body shrunk as she saw three sharp sword shadows, accompanied by extremely violent Yuan power, abruptly arrive. These three attacks were incomparably deadly. The ones who had attacked were clearly genuine Yuan Gate experts, and each one was not weaker than Suru. The sneak attacks of the trio sealed off all of Suru's escape routes. Moreover, given how exhausted the latter was, it was not possible for her to block the attacks. Suru was also aware her own condition. She watched as the sharp sword shadows rapidly magnified in her eyes, while helplessness and distress surfaced on her lips. Was this the fate of Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace? The sharp attacks arrived in an instant. However, a green light suddenly pierced the air just as the attacks were about to hit. As the green light flashed past, the three perfect profound life stage Yuan Gate experts burst into a bloody fog without being able to let out a scream. Bang bang! The momentum of the green light did not diminish after sweeping past the three Yuan Gate experts. The many Yuan Gate disciples behind the trio were all eliminated by the sharp green light. In an instant, a huge empty space appeared in the Yuan Gate's flood-like offensive. The sudden appearance of this powerful attack also caused the fighting that permeated the sky to pause. Suru and the other Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace disciples were momentarily stunned. After which, they were joyfully surprised to see a drifting beauty wearing a white dress. Long sword in hand, she slowly arrived. Her originally cold demeanor was currently piercingly icy. Senior Sister Lingqing Xu. Countless Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace disciples immediately cried out as they gazed upon the figure. Their originally dispirited morale was greatly raised. Senior Sister. Suru looked at the white-clothed lady that had slowly come to her side. Although the latter still wore a veil, it was possible for Suru to detect the coldness and killing intent on Lingqing Xu's face. Junior sisters, it has been tough on all of you. Lingqing Xu looked at Suru's weary face. After which, she glanced at the injury-riddled Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace disciples. The jade-like hand which grasped the long sword gently trembled as she slowly said, "Senior sister, protecting Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace is also our duty." Suru shook her head and said. Lingqing Xu lightly nodded. She lifted her head to look at the sky full of black clouds. Yuan Gate disciples continuously rushed over from within the black clouds. She could see a couple of elderly figures at the middle of the black clouds. A powerful pressure spread from their bodies, enveloping the entire Nine Heaven's Serene Purity Palace. They were the true threat. Ha ha, someone decent has finally appeared. Eh? Where is that palace master of your Nine Heaven's Serene Purity Palace? The Yuan Gate First Elder looked at Lingqing Xu from the sky and laughed faintly. However, he quickly sighed. Oh, I forgot that she was seriously injured by me. Perhaps she is already dead. Countless Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace disciples stared at the Yuan Gate First Elder in rage as their bodies shook with anger. Are you the one who injured teacher? Lingqing Xu's eyes were as chilly as the cold moon as she stared at the Yuan Gate First Elder. A frightening aura suddenly unfurled from within her body and dashed into the sky. The strength of that aura had already reached the samsara stage. Moreover, for some unknown reason, this mere samsara stage aura gave off a faint feeling of danger, a danger even greater than those peak experts who had touched reincarnation. The Yuan Gate First Elder lifted his brow after he felt Lingqing Xu's aura and coldly smiled. From the looks of it, your palace master has passed on all her Yuan power to you just before she died. You are really extraordinary. There is a 90% chance of such an inheritance process failing, yet, you actually succeeded. However, so what if you managed to obtain her power? A mocking look was revealed in the Yuan Gate First Elder's eyes as he continued, even your palace master was defeated by me. Do you think a younger generation member like yourself is a match for this old man? Lingqing Xu's pretty autumn water-like eyes quietly stared at the Yuan Gate First Elder. Those extremely cold eyes of hers caused even the latter to frown slightly. Soon after, however, he icily smiled, shook his head and waved his hand. Kill her. Understood. A Yuan Gate Elder behind him respectfully responded. After which, the elder slowly stepped forward with an indifferent expression. A frighteningly monstrous aura spread as he walked, while an evil black light flashed deep within his eyes. The strength of this Yuan Gate Elder was clearly at the samsara stage. Moreover, the strength of his aura was clearly far greater than Zhao Kuei, whom Lin Dong had killed. Evidently, Yuan Gate had invested a great deal in order to eliminate Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. Youngling, you should quickly surrender and make Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace submit to our Yuan Gate. Otherwise, nothing will be left of your Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. The Yuan Gate Elder stared at Lingqing Xu with a pair of dark and cold eyes as he frostily shouted. However, Lingqing Xu's expression grew increasingly cold in response. She took a step forward and the long sword in her hand suddenly slashed forward. The Yuan power in the area suddenly surged as the sword was swung. A green ray of light penetrated through the void at an indescribable speed, and even space itself seemed to have been cut apart in that moment. Careful! The pupils of the Yuan Gate First Elder abruptly shrunk upon seeing this as he sternly cried out. The hairs on the body of the Yuan Gate Elder suddenly stood up as a feeling of intense danger flashed across his heart. Vast and mighty Yuan power instantly wrapped around him like an iron wall. The green light beam descended just as his defense was formed. After which, it swept past. The surging Yuan power and the expression on the face of the Yuan Gate Elder immediately froze. A faint sound was suddenly transmitted over from the majestic Yuan power defense. After which, countless pairs of eyes were stunned to see cracks rapidly extend on it. In the end, the incomparably tough defense fell apart with a final bang. While this happened, the body of the Yuan Gate Elder inside also popped into bloody mist. The sound of cold air being inhaled echoed within the area. No one could have expected that a samsara stage super expert would be killed by Lingqing Xu in a single strike. As the bloody mist rose, the Yuan spirit died in black light fled from within it. His sharp and miserable cry resounded across the sky, "You little slut! How dare you destroy my body? I will never let you off. Humph, useless thing." A cold glint flashed within the eyes of the First Elder. With a wave of his sleeve, the Yuan spirit was kept inside the sleeve. After which, his dark and sinister eyes focused on the long sword-wielding Lingqing Xu below. The latter's eyes were still cold, but a faint paleness had flashed across her face. It was obvious that the powerful attack from earlier had consumed a significant amount of energy. You are indeed worthy of being the most outstanding disciple in the history of Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. It is likely that even your teacher cannot not compare to you. However, do you think that you alone can save Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace today? All Yuan Gate disciples, listen up. Wash Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace in blood. The First Elder waved his hand in a fit of rage. His voice was filled with brutal murderous intent. Understood. The Yuan Gate disciples let out an earth-shaking shout upon hearing the First Elder's furious cry, while murderous desire filled the sky. Suru clenched her teeth after seeing Yuan Gate's offensive surge over again. She immediately led everyone to block the attack. Junior sister. However, she was stopped by Lingqing Xu. The latter glanced at the flood-like attacks of the Yuan Gate disciples and softly said, "Lead the disciples and retreat. I will cover your backs." Senior Sister Qingxu. Suru was alarmed. Although Lingqing Xu had displayed astonishing strength earlier, Yuan Gate was overwhelming. Moreover, the most formidable Yuan Gate First Elder had yet to take action. How could Lingqing Xu stop all of them alone? "Senior Sister, we aren't afraid of death. Allow us to remain behind and share the fate of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace." The surrounding Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples hurriedly said. "If all of you die, Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace will cease to exist." Longsword in hand, Lingqing Xu clenched her other hand and a simple-looking token appeared within it. After which, her cold voice spread, "With my position as the new Palace Master of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace, I order all of you to withdraw immediately. Those who disobey will be expelled from the sect." Senior Sister. Tears began to gather in the eyes of countless Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples as they involuntarily knelt down. The sight of this black sea of people was extremely spectacular. "Listen to me if you do not wish for my death to be in vain." A crystal tear seemed to fall under the veil, but was quickly scattered by the wind. Subsequently, she lifted her head and slowly headed in the direction of the Yuan Gate's flood-like offensive. The thin sword-wielding figure appeared lonely but determined under the setting sun. "Qingzhu may die, but the sect will never fall." Qingzhu lifted her head. Her cold voice contained an unyielding will as it resounded across the sky. "You do have a backbone." The Yuan Gate First Elder laughed in a darkly sinister manner as endless brutality surged in his eyes. Soon after, he waved his hand as an ice-cold voice spread. "Kill. Do not allow a single one to remain. Attack." The astonishingly evil aura seemed to cause the entire area to become dark and gloomy. Yuan Gate disciples swept forth like locusts, scarlet-eyed as they wielded the long swords in their hands and charged towards the stunning beauty that was slowly walking towards them. However, this intimidating sight did not hinder her at all. Those beautiful limpid autumn water eyes were clear and cold, completely without unnecessary emotion. The thin gauze that covered her face faintly outlined her absolute beauty, causing even the evil aura that filled the area to pause for a moment. In the face of the flood-like attacks of countless Yuan Gate disciples, that beautiful figure was like a tree that stood before the flood. It seemed weak, but had a suppleness that could not be shaken. Behind her, the Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples gazed at the figure of this soul-stirring beauty with red eyes. Some of the female disciples could not help but cry. "Green Lotus Thousand Sword Art." Lingqing Xu finally stopped walking and stood in place as boundless Yuan power unfurled, transforming into countless green light swords in the sky above. With a gentle wave of her jade-like hand, sharp wind noises immediately sounded in the area. Countless light swords seemed to cover the sky as they shot forth, ferociously smashing into the flood-like wave of Yuan Gate disciples. Miserable shrieks rang out as fresh blood spurted, dyeing the ground red. The flood-like offense of Yuan Gate had been forcibly stopped by a single Lingqing Xu at this moment. In the sky, the Yuan Gate First Elder observed the heavy losses due to the deaths and injuries of the Yuan Gate disciples with detached eyes. Black light surged within his eyes, but he did not feel any regret at such losses. The entire Yuan Gate was clearly very different from before. "Cheng Piyu, Wang Su, Su Li. The three of you will stop her. Be careful, this little one's attacks are somewhat strange. Do not be as useless as Xu Ling." However, being stopped by Lingqing Xu was after all something that this Yuan Gate First Elder did not wish to see. After pondering in silence for a while, he coldly commanded, "Yes." Upon his hearing his words, three sinister-looking elders behind responded. Their auras were completely the same as the Xu Ling who had previously been killed by Lingqing Xu. Evidently, they were also pinnacle experts within Yuan Gate. The three moved simultaneously. In the next instant, they appeared in front of the Yuan Gate disciples. With cold snorts, they attacked at the same time. The black light in their eyes surged as Yuan power that covered the sky spread, transforming into layer upon layer of light screens that completely blocked the light swords that were shooting over from all directions. Massacre 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. The trio coldly shouted. The eyes of the Yuan Gate disciples, who had been stopped, immediately turned scarlet red as they responded. They immediately charged towards the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples behind Lingqing Xu. Upon seeing this, Lingqing Xu gently gritted her teeth. However, just as she was about to move, the sound of wind was heard, and those 3 Yuan Gate elders had already surrounded her, sealing her movement. Get lost! A clear voice containing slight rage emerged from behind the thin veil. Lingqing Xu tightly gripped her long sword as ice-cold killing intent flitted across her beautiful eyes. Humph, your many 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace elders have all been defeated by us. What does a youngster like you dare to do? The 3 Yuan Gate elders merely sneered. Without giving Lingqing Xu any time to respond, boundless Yuan power rushed forth as fingers thrust at the air. Yuan power transformed into 3 titanic fingers that powerfully pushed down onto Lingqing Xu. Bang! The ground within a 10,000 feet radius had already crumbled before the giant fingers landed. Enormous cracks spread outwards like the deep abyss. Lingqing Xu silently observed these powerful attacks. In the next moment, her slender jade-like hands suddenly came together as resplendent green light surged out from within her body like floodwaters. A huge green lotus swiftly started to take shape above her head. Bang! The 3 giant fingers that seemed to be able to raise the sky heavily landed on the green lotus as berserk Yuan power exploded. Break! A clear shout abruptly emerged, and the green lotus started to revolve. Petals flickered with incomparably sharp and cold light, and even space itself seemed to be sliced apart. The 3 titanic fingers were shredded to pieces as the green lotus spun. Upon seeing this, the 3 elders' eyes hardened. Lingqing Xu's aura was merely at the samsara stage. How could her attacks be so powerful? While they puzzled over this in their hearts, the green lotus had already ripped the 3 giant fingers to shreds. Next, it transformed into a flash of green light that headed straight for the trio. Humph! Great Yuan Heaven Slash! When they saw this, the trio's eyes turned cold. Each furiously chopped downwards with one hand. Boundless Yuan power surged, transforming into 3 giant blades that ripped through space and viciously landed on the green lotus. Bang! The green lotus was unable to bear the destructive forces from the trio and ultimately exploded. However, when the green lotus exploded, a flash of green light abruptly swept out from within it. In the blink of an eye, it had already appeared in front of the 3 Yuan Gate elders like a ghost. Not good. As green light was reflected in the 3 elders' eyes, an extremely intense feeling of danger immediately rose in their hearts. Beast-like roars emerged from their throats as the evil black light in their eyes abruptly surged. The trio attacked in fear and anger, while their hands turned completely pitch black. Devil chi swirled around their hands, which were quick as lightning as they furiously swatted at the green light. Green light flickered, revealing an absolutely gorgeous figure. Primal chaos seemed to flit across her autumn water-like eyes at this moment as 3 sword lights swept out with a jerk of her jade-like hand. The lovely green light figure brushed past the 3 Yuan Gate elders, before slowly returning her long sword into its sheath. A line of blood appeared on each of the trio's throats and fresh blood immediately spurted out as their heads flew into the air. As heads flew, 3 Yuan spirits flew out in terror, intending to escape. However, Lingqing Xu was prepared this time. Her eyes turned cold as 3 incomparably formidable sword strikes pierced the 3 Yuan spirits, destroying them. In a flash, another 3 samsara stage super experts had been defeated at Lingqing Xu's hands. Moreover, she was even more ruthless this time, and had even destroyed her opponent's Yuan spirits. There was no mercy at all. However, when Lingqing Xu finished off the trio, a soft and muffled groan emerged from under the thin veil. 3 black hand-shaped marks had appeared on her shoulder, and bright red blood had dyed the veil red. Lingqing Xu ignored the blood at the corner of her mouth. She merely slowly lifted her head as she firmly stared at the Yuan Gate First Elder watching her with indifferent eyes from atop the black clouds. Amongst these Yuan Gate experts, he was the only person who gave her a feeling of extreme danger. To have reached this level at such an age, you are likely the only one who deserves the title of the #1 younger generation member in the Eastern Xian region. Compared to you, the so-called three little kings of our Yuan Gate are truly a joke. The Yuan Gate First Elder emotionlessly said. #1 younger generation member. Upon hearing this title, Lingqing Xu's usually cool and cold eyes finally turned a little absent-minded for a moment as scenes from 3 years ago flashed past in her mind. In that unique devil region, a youngster drenched in blood held a long spear as he proudly faced the three great Yuan Gate sect masters. That battle had shocked the entire Eastern Xian region. You are wrong. I'm afraid I will never have a chance to be #1. I might die here today, however. An absolutely beautiful smile seemed to appear under Lingqing Xu's veil. I believe that in future, there will similarly be someone who will annihilate your Yuan Gate. Is that so? The Yuan Gate First Elder smiled in a mocking manner. Soon after, he said, "This old one is called Luong. The current Yu has the qualifications to know this name. Although I know that many young people in the Eastern Xian region have been captivated by you, you have no appeal in this old man's eyes. Do not naively believe that I will show mercy when I attack." Luong finally slowly stepped out from the black clouds. Black light frantically gathered in the depths of his pupils, while devil chi that could fill the sky gathered behind him. It covered the sky, concealing even the sun. Evidently, this Yuan Gate First Elder finally could not help but personally take action. As she felt the astonishing pressure from Luong's body, Lingqing Xu's slender and lovely figure slightly trembled. Soon after, she looked back at the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples that were slowly being pushed back as they fought. Her jade-like hand slowly clenched tightly as the long sword in her hand was pointed at Luong. What she needed to do now was to stall this Yuan Gate First Elder. Or else, not a single one of the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples would be able to leave. Don't worry, I will not let a single one of your 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples escape. As if he knew of Lingqing Xu's thoughts, Luong faintly smiled. His smile looked exceptionally sinister and brutal. These Yuan Gate elders, who normally looked somewhat respectable and holy, had now become the most cruel demons. Lingqing Xu did not reply. Her figure turned into a streak of green as an unrivaled sword glint pierced towards Luong like lightning. The edge of her sword swept forth. However, just as it was about to touch Luong, 2 withered fingers covered by black demonic patterns stopped it. Sparks erupted in all directions, but the sharp sword was unable to cause even the smallest injury. The corners of Luong's mouth lifted, revealing a malicious smile. His other hand formed a tightly clenched fist as layers of demonic patterns appeared on it. An extremely astonishing evil aura spread outwards. Lingqing Xu's eyes turned ice-cold. She gazed at Luong's violent punch as she gritted her teeth, while a wondrous turbid light rapidly gushed out from the depths of her pupils. The demonic fist pierced through space and arrived. The vast and mighty Yuan power on Lingqing Xu's long sword suddenly completely disappeared. However, a peculiar luster swept across the edge of the blade. The blade was inclined and ferociously thrust forward. Luong's 2 fingers were instantly blown away as the long sword flew. Fresh blood spurted out as the sword charged towards his heart without stopping. Bang! However, just as the long sword was about to pierce Luong's heart, the berserk without equal demonic fist had already landed on Lingqing Xu's body. Devil chi seemed to cover the sky as it swept forth, and even space itself started to shatter. A mouthful of fresh blood was vomited from Lingqing Xu's mouth, while the tip of the sword which had pierced Luong's chest was no longer able to move forward. Sadness flitted across her beautiful eyes as her figure catapulted backwards under the horrified gazes of the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples behind. Blood blossomed, a sight that caused one grief. Senior Sister Qingxu. The numerous 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples that were originally retreating immediately screamed loudly. They stopped retreating and instead desperately charged towards Lingqing Xu as if they were mad. Humph! Luong glanced at the stumps that remained of his 2 chopped-off fingers, before looking at the sword wound on his chest as an evil look involuntarily flashed within his eyes. With a grasp of his hand, devil chi surged forth, transforming into a 10,000 feet long devil knife. He waved his sleeve and the devil knife pierced through space, quick as lightning as it shot towards the injured Lingqing Xu. Lingqing Xu bit down hard on her red lips as she watched the devil knife swiftly approach. Helplessness and despair flashed in those clear eyes hers. In the end, she had been defeated. Was their Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace going to disappear like this under the butcher knife of Yuan Gate? Senior sister. Suru could only watch the beautiful lady, who seemed so fragile and about to wilt in the face of the approaching demonic knife, as tears involuntarily rolled down from her eyes. After which, she howled. Her voice was no longer as clear as it had been before, it was instead filled with matchless despair and sadness. As her howl echoed in the sky, an incomparably hurried wind sound immediately rang out in the area. Astonished gazes lifted one by one, only to see a certain spot in the distance distort as a figure flickered and swept out. Boom! At this moment, the demonic knife fell with a boom. The ground instantly crumbled as giant cracks spread outwards like a spider web. Countless horrified gazes looked towards the dusty area as the eyes of numerous Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples instantly dimmed as if they had lost their final hope. Senior sister. Suru slowly fell to her knees as she blankly stared at that far-off spot. However, in her dazed state, she watched as the dust started to scatter, only to see a completely undamaged area on the broken ground. Moreover, Lingqing Xu lay there unscathed. That's... A cry of surprise was suddenly heard. Suru hastily lifted her head, only to find a thin figure quietly standing some distance in front of Lingqing Xu. The figure did not look big and strong, however, it had completely withstood everything that had been thrown at it. That's... Big brother Lin Dong. Suru blankly gazed at the vaguely familiar figure. In the next instant, she suddenly stood up as disbelief and indescribable joy gushed out on her pretty face. Gasps successively sounded out behind her, causing Lingqing Xu to slowly open her tightly shut eyes. She looked at the figure that had unknowingly appeared in front of her as she firmly bit her red lips. Blood flowed down from the corner of her mouth, but she forcibly endured the ripples in her heart and forced her gaze to slowly shift away from the figure's back. In front of her, the figure was silent for quite some time. In the end, he slightly tilted his head back as he looked at the speechless figure behind him with a complicated gaze. Soon after, gentleness stealthily surged in his pitch-black eyes. Don't worry. With me around, no one can hurt you. Upon hearing this somewhat hoarse and soft voice, even with Lingqing Xu's cool and cold character, an unstoppable feeling of sourness rushed to the tip of her nose at this moment, while water started to gather in her eyes. Demonic aura surged across the sky while the land collapsed. However, that skinny figure simply stood quietly in front. Meanwhile, those monstrous giant waves were all unable to reach him. He turned his body before he uttered those words in a somewhat hoarse voice. After which, he walked and went beside Lingqing Xu, whose head was tilted towards one side, before he looked at her blood-stained veil. Meanwhile, there was still a familiar chillness on the latter's brows. However, this was different from the iciness of Ying Huan. Her chillness contained an inborn pride, and that was also perhaps the reason why she was so outstanding. Lingqing Xu also realized that that young man had walked to her side. Her water-like eyes, which didn't reveal much emotions even when she was about to die, suddenly became a little chaotic. Clenching her hands, she firmly repressed her emotions and stopped herself from looking at that man, who appeared extremely dazzling at this moment. Currently, his appearance was completely different from the miserable appearance he had 3 years ago. While her mind was in a state of chaos, the young man in front of her bent his body, before he directly lifted her off the ground from her waist. The moment she left the ground, Lingqing Xu felt her mind turn blank. A moment later, she recovered her senses before she began to struggle violently. Stop moving. A somewhat low and deep voice was transmitted over, before Lingqing Xu's delicate figure stiffened. Finally, she lifted her head. Immediately, the youthful face, which looked a lot more tough and mature compared to 3 years ago, was imprinted on her eyes. Currently, the latter's brows were knitted. Moreover, his elegant and sharp demeanor even took Lingqing Xu by surprise. The past 3 years seemed to have washed away his shell and gradually revealed the things that were hidden deep within his bones. Lingqing Xu clenched her teeth gently. However, as she was already wounded, her resistance slowly died down. Meanwhile, only her tightly clenched hands were proof of the ripples stirred in her heart. Lin, big brother Lin Dong. Suru and the many disciples from Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace were startled when they saw that young man, who was walking towards them with Lingqing Xu in his arms. It was a long while later, before Suru suddenly came to her senses. Immediately, unconcealable wild joy surged onto her pretty face. Big brother Lin Dong, it's really you. You have returned to the Eastern Xian region. I knew that you would come back. Lin Dong stopped in front of Suru. When he saw the joy on that pretty young lady's face, he involuntarily smiled. The timid and weak young lady from before had finally blossomed. Well done. Lin Dong gently placed Lingqing Xu down from his embrace. After which, he extended his hand and rubbed Suru's little head. The latter's face reddened immediately. However, this familiar action caused warmth to surface in her heart. Instantly, she felt as though all the fatigue within her body had disappeared. Beside them, Lingqing Xu suddenly coughed softly. Meanwhile, a bright red color surfaced under her veil. Clearly, Lu Feng's attacks had left her with severe injuries. Senior Sister Qingxu, you all right? Suru was greatly startled. The surrounding disciples from Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace also hurriedly surrounded her. Meanwhile, their eyes were all filled with anxiety. Lingqing Xu shook her head. She looked at her blood-stained seniors and juniors, before she softly said, "Brace yourselves. Powerful foes remain at our doorsteps." After hearing her words, the crowd quickly snapped out of their joyous state. Immediately, all their faces darkened. After all, there was still a huge army from Yuan Gate on the outside, eyeing them with ill intent. Moreover, even Lingqing Xu was defeated by the first elder of Yuan Gate. Therefore, they had essentially lost their final pillar of support. Leave everything else to my Dao sect. All of you should just focus on protecting her. Lin Dong glanced at Lingqing Xu. Currently, the latter's eyes had regained some of its usual color. However, she chose to avoid making eye contact with him. In fact, each time they were about to make eye contact, she would turn away immediately. Big brother Lin Dong, you, be careful. The first elder of Yuan Gate is extremely powerful. Suru bit her red lips. Although logically speaking, she felt that Lin Dong should think about escaping at a juncture like this, the blind faith she had in Lin Dong twisted the words she wanted to say. Friend from Dao sect, on behalf of my Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace, Qingxu would like to thank you for your help today. However, I hope that you will retreat if you are unable to handle them. After all, my Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace will not give in to Yuan Gate even at the cost of our lives. Lingqing Xu lowered her pretty eyes and softly said. By their side, Suru stuck her tongue out when she heard those words. However, she did not dare to speak up. After all, she had a close relationship with Lingqing Xu and knew that there was a murky relationship between the two of them. In fact, over the past 3 years since Lin Dong left, she occasionally caught Lingqing Xu falling into a daze during her training. Moreover, judging by her demeanor, it was clear that she was pining after someone. Those incidents piqued Suru's curiosity. After all, Lingqing Xu had a cool and aloof character, and she had strong mental fortitude. In fact, there were countless geniuses and monsters in the Eastern Xian region who were pining after her. However, none of them were able to make any headway. At times, Suru even thought that there was no man in this world who could cause this haughty fairy-like senior to behave like an ordinary little girl. As such, when she saw Lingqing Xu acting in this manner, she felt great shock in her heart. However, what puzzled her was that Lingqing Xu chose to treat big brother Lin Dong like a stranger, even though there was clearly a relationship between the both of them. Although she had her doubts, Lingqing Xu clearly enjoyed an extremely high status in Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. Hence, she did not dare to question her. Why are you calling me a friend from Dao sect? Don't you know my name? Lin Dong also lifted his brows when he heard Lingqing Xu's words. Meanwhile, a trace of fury flashed across his eyes. Was this woman trying to provoke him on purpose? Lingqing Xu's eyes remained indifferent. She neither lifted her head nor did she reply. Lin Dong snorted furiously after he saw her conduct. Immediately, he turned around and left. However, Lingqing Xu involuntarily clenched her hand at this moment. Meanwhile, her teeth gently bit her red lips, which were hidden under her veil. However, she stubbornly remained quiet. However, while she remained obstinate, Lin Dong, who had only taken 2 steps, suddenly turned around. Then, he directly flung his palm towards Lingqing Xu's face, in front of many startled onlookers from 9 Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. Moreover, it looked as though he was lashing out in anger. Lingqing Xu's delicate figure shook when she detected the palm wind that was rushing over. She shut her pretty eyes and did not move. Rip. Fingernails, which were accompanied by palm wind, brushed past Lingqing Xu's face. After which, she suddenly felt a cooling sensation on her face. It turns out that the veil covering her face had been forcefully removed. With the removal of her veil, her seemingly perfect pretty face hidden beneath was also exposed. At that moment, it seemed as though the sky had brightened. You? The cooling sensation on her face caused Lingqing Xu to be startled. She hurriedly opened her eyes before she touched her jade-like face. After which, she was startled when she saw the veil in Lin Dong's hand. Finally, shame and anger appeared on her usually cool and aloof face. Those emotions, which appeared instantly, caused the surrounding 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples to be stunned. After all, Lingqing Xu typically acted in a cool and indifferent manner within the palace, and she seldom revealed such a touching emotion that was comparable to a fairy descending in the mortal world. You look much better than before. There is no need to act like a fairy in front of me. I don't buy it. Lin Dong was absent-minded for a moment because of that dazzlingly and beautiful face. After which, he teased when he saw that shame and anger had surged onto Lingqing Xu's face. Who cares whether you like it or not? Lingqing Xu said furiously. However, even though she was angry, her face still looked mesmerizing. Ha ha. Lin Dong laughed out loud. After which, his dark black eyes gradually became cold and stern. He slowly turned his head before he glanced at the experts from Yuan Gate, who were eyeing them with ill intent. Then, he spoke in a faint voice, "Leave everything else to me." Lingqing Xu looked at his skinny back. Her emotions seemed to have become a lot more chaotic after her veil was snatched by that fellow in an overbearing manner. Then, she bit her lips and suppressed the anger and embarrassment in her heart. Regardless, Lin Dong had showed up at a critical moment, and he had indeed stirred ripples in her calm, unemotional heart. Her relationship with Lin Dong was so complicated that she was troubled by it. Given their characters, there was no way that they could easily forget about the ridiculous deed that they did back then. As such, there would always be a unique spot for each other in their respective hearts. This was something that even the prideful Lingqing Xu had no choice but to admit. After all, if it was another man who had removed her veil, she would have pierced him with her sword immediately. However, since it was Lin Dong who did so, that act, which could incite her murderous intent, only left her vexed and embarrassed. Lingqing Xu was undoubtedly a haughty and aloof person. This was clearly demonstrated when they met for the first time many years ago. However, on their first encounter, she was an extremely talented individual from 9 Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace, while Lin Dong was merely a kid from the branch family of a clan in a low-rank empire. Hence, there was a massive gap between them, both in terms of status and strength. Back then, Lingqing Xu ought to have killed this person, who had taken her virginity, with a stab from her sword. However, Lin Dong's bright and heated eyes stopped her from doing so. At that time, she knew that this seemingly weak young man possessed tenacity and determination that no one could match up to. Moreover, she was aware that she had become the target whom he was actively chasing after. Furthermore, she was also well aware of the tremendous efforts that he had put in. In order to accomplish his goal, since that day onwards, this cub-like young man had begun to run with all his might on a path filled with all sorts of dangers and obstacles. Even though he ended up covered with wounds, he never regretted his decision. Perhaps, at that time, even she did not expect that this once weak young man would actually stand in front of her many years later and use his small body to help her to block the wild storms which even she could not endure. Emotions churned within her heart. Past memories also began to replay within Lingqing Xu's mind. Finally, a gentle emotion appeared within her clear and bright eyes. After which, a soft voice was slowly transmitted into Lin Dong's ears. Be careful. This video will end here.